It is such a pleasure to be here with you today, and I thank you for the opportunity to come and talk with you all. I'm going to try to consolidate some of my thoughts into the time that we have left, because you deserve to get to lunch and back to your days, although I'd like to show of hands for how many people are actually going to go back to the office on such a gorgeous day, once they're done here. All right, some of you will anyway. So let's get started. I am going to be trying to weave some of the concepts we've been talking about today into the environment, the ecosystem, if you will, of in-house practice, which I believe the majority of you in the audience are in-house, and you understand that this is a particular challenge, because while we can talk about all of these amazing advances and all of these wonderful things that are in the pipeline and these incredible innovations and ideas, we all have a desk full of work to do right now. We all have budgets, we all have managers, we have all kinds of pressures, we have home lives, we have everything, it seems, working against us spending the time and even spending the effort to try to figure out how to change the way we work. We know there's a great reward at the end of it, but it's very difficult to get there. So to pull on what it is that Carl has ended with, this is really a question for in-house departments of behavior change, of figuring out what it is that they can incrementally adopt and develop and leverage in their practices in a realistic way to start their movement. And it will be very different from what it is a person who's a general counsel as a one-person department in a company that's making a product in a certain kind of industry experiences versus someone who's working in a 300-person or 1,500-person legal department in a mega business doing business in 122 countries across a variety of industries. Solutions in one environment will not be the same as solutions in another environment. So part of what we're going to try to weave into this is some of the scalability issues, some of the questions about figuring out how one size fits one in your organization, looking at the kinds of things that will make this not only practical for you, but will help you drive home the value of counseling for your client and help you spend more time on what's important to that client, which is, clearly getting the remedial work done, but more importantly, starting to free yourself to be able to focus on advancing the business, which for most in-house lawyers is how they define the challenge of their practice. How do I get out from under the weight of all of these things on my to-do list every day and think about the things that will really help my organization move forward, not just get out of the current rut or the current problem that we've got. So I'd like to start off by giving you just a short overview of what it is that I'm going to try to get through in our time together. I think it's important for us to begin with what it is, I guess it was Sonia who was saying it earlier, as she's gone through her travails and moving from an in-house lawyer to someone who's working on these issues. If you're not a legal technician, how is it that you can look at some of these kinds of opportunities and leverage them? We'll talk very shortly, and probably not much, about why does it matter, because I think that everything you've heard so far today pretty much has answered those questions for you. And I'll try to spend most of my time talking about leading technology practices in firms and in law departments. And I will talk a little bit about firms as well as departments, because for so many departments, the majority of their budget and the majority of the work done by the department is done in collaboration or in partnership with law firms, and now increasingly a wide array of other kinds of legal service providers who do work, in many cases, formerly done by law firms. And so it's important to take a look at what kinds of things you do in collaboration with others, as well as what you need to do internally for your own operations. And then we'll talk a little bit about leveraging change for results. In this conversation, and in case I forget to say it later, I think it's very important for us to be thinking about and separating what it is that we're looking at that's what I would call sustaining technology versus what it is we're looking at that I think is disruptive technology. And I'm sure you've heard these terms before, but just to briefly mention, sustaining technology is the kind of technology or the kind of data that helps you perform your current roles and tasks better. Makes you better at it, makes you faster at it, may give you a more consistent output, may be done at a cheaper price, for instance, but it really has to do with better, faster, cheaper, not in radically changing the way you do your work. The disruptive or the transformational kinds of technologies are when lawyers no longer do the work, for instance, or where we look at a world in which the legal problems we used to address have now been answered. What are we going to do next? Or what are we going to do instead? So I want you to keep in mind, as we look at these different kinds of issues, what it is that's sustaining, which is good. I'm not suggesting it's bad to look at sustaining technology, and what it is that we're going to talk about that will help us with that 5 to 10 or 3 to 10 year window that Rohit had talked about earlier today. So let me start with my confession. I too am a tech idiot. I have my Mac. I've had my Mac since the mid 80s. I love working with my computer, but I don't have any ability. I don't know how to program, right? I don't maintain my own website. I don't do all of these kinds of things that one might hope that you could do if you were going to be tech savvy. But I really don't think that's really a problem, except that for many of us who don't have a lot of technical skills, we're incredibly intimidated. And so I'd start off by sharing that my first impressions or my first thoughts of what technology meant started for me in the 1960s when I'd lie on the rug on my stomach watching TV. And for me, my first tech crush was the robot on Lost in Space. Now, I know it's an American-based show, but you had to have seen it. You know, the robot would always walk around saying, "Danger, danger, Will Robinson, danger." Wouldn't we love to have the robot in our legal department? When there was a decision being made at the strategy meeting, or when there was something going on and the robot came in and said, "Danger, danger." This guy was your friend. This wasn't your enemy. He wasn't looking to replace you. He was the person who was the mini-me. He was the one who was the more rational thinker whenever these stupid hatched plans that they did on Lost in Space were going to take place. It was the robot that was the voice of sanity. This should be how we think about tech today, not the way we see it in movies or on TV where the machines are taking over the world and killing off all the humans. That's not the point of what it is. It's more to be our support mate. So, you know, I will simply note to you that we end up as lawyers behaving more like Dr. Smith, you know, the person who we hated on that show. Therefore, I'd like to suggest to you that we shouldn't be thinking like Dr. Smith. We should be thinking like Carl. We should be looking at the ways that we can embrace the technology, that we can figure out how it is that that robot will now be there in our practice, just like he saved Will Robinson and Judy and everyone else on the ship. And so with Carl's help, with the help of lots of other people who are out there doing great things in the tech industry, we can get started looking at what's out there. So here's my admonition. I'll run right past it in the interest of time. It's here. And when I say tech, I'm kind of using it as an all-inclusive term to include data and information technologies and communication. It's growing, it's not going away, and I'm sorry, I love to say this when I go out and talk to lawyers, get over it. I can't tell you how many times I hear lawyers say, but we can't do these things with tech because law is inherently unpredictable. I'm not going to argue that, it is. But guess what? So's business. The people who pay you money are in unpredictable businesses, and they use these technologies to help them mitigate that. Not to solve it. It will always be inherently unpredictable, but like the robot, to be able to help you figure out how to sift through, how to advance what it is you want to do. So this idea that I want to get across to you is that you should be leveraging this. You should be thinking about how it is that you look at these issues, because if you don't, the wide variety of service providers who are out there, who are doing a lot of the functions that lawyers previously did. Note, I'm not saying they're practicing law. I'm saying they are performing functions that lawyers previously charged their clients to perform, in-house and outside. We will be competing with these folks for business. And especially as more and more legal business is performed by organizations with outstanding histories of extremely close and valuable relationships with corporations, like the Big Three, the Big Four, the Big Five, folks who specialize in staffing, who specialize in consulting and in helping people solve business problems, folks who've always brought multidisciplinary teams to the table and harnessed and leveraged technology, will increasingly be doing this work. So I'm not saying this to scare you. I'm saying this to say to you that lawyers stand to become irrelevant if they don't get behind many of these practices that allow them to prove their relevance by focusing on their higher use to their clients, not sifting documents, but advising them on how to move to the next level of business success. I'd like to get into the client portion of the conversation by discussing with you the list on the left and how it moves toward the list on the right. The list on the left is what it is that came out of years of work on the ACC Value Challenge and a variety of projects that we developed over the course of probably 10 to 15 years. Now, when the challenge came out from the Association of Corporate Counsel, it came out that we launched around a soft launch in 2007, and we did our formal launch in 2008, 2 weeks after the markets crashed. And everyone thought we were rather prescient for having done that because everyone assumes that the entire movement toward value-based services in the in-house world started as a result of the economic downturn when suddenly clients didn't have the same amount of money to be able to spend on legal services. And I will say to you, as someone who worked at the association amongst in-house counsel from the 1980s on, it's just not true. What happened as a result of the downturn was clearly bringing a lot of people to the table to have a conversation who didn't need to have that conversation before. It clearly accelerated people's interest in moving toward new practices. But I have heard in-house counsel bitching in the hallway about all of the issues that we're talking about here today and how they wish they could solve them. Felt just as incompetent and incapable and frustrated as their outside counsel, but they felt very strongly that they wanted them solved. This has been a conversation that's been going on between clients and their firms in the corporate market forever. So when we went out on the challenge to figure out how we were going to look at these issues, we started off by looking at what it is that clients really wanted. We held conversations with people from the law firm world. We held conversations with people from the legal service provider, vendor kind of world, and we held conversations with people from departments. General counsel, as well as the managing lawyers within the legal department and the operations leaders within the department who are responsible for the work being done. And what I assumed when we went into these conversations is we would be developing different lists from each of those groups, that they would all come back and tell us what was important to clients was different. Because after all, there's this huge divide between the way that in-house lawyers and all the people who served them were actually operating. And so I assumed there would be these massive splits, this disconnect between the groups. Much to my surprise, and in hindsight, it shouldn't have been a surprise, the lists that came out of these conversations were the same. And they were in the order that you see them in the left column. The measurable result was what it was that law firms wanted, as well as what it was that clients wanted, as well as what it was that the legal process community was trying to provide as vendors. Ideas for better management and lean efficiency in the provision of legal work. All three wanted it. Certainty and predictability topped the list for many people, but overall came in third. Really, it is the result that you would get from the first two becoming part of your strategy as a department, as a law firm, or as a legal service provider. Costs that equate with value, notice that's number 4. It's the first time we've had a notion of the money being involved here. And we're going to talk a little bit more about that in a second. Money in these issues is always important. Of course, legal departments have to be incredibly cost-focused and cost-conscious in what it is they do. But lower cost is a result of better practice, not in and of itself the goal you're trying to drive. And so as we got further into these conversations, we realized that cost just kind of naturally flowed as part of the list. Knowledge practices were seen as incredibly important. The idea that law has largely been about reinventing that wheel with each iteration of the work, as if every single thing that a lawyer does is precious and unique, the whole idea of the Richard Susskind bespoke conversation in terms of service provision, now moving toward a knowledge that probably 95% of everything we do in litigation, in consulting practices that we have with our clients, in preventive law discussions, in counseling services, in transactional work, 90 to 95% of what we do on each of those kinds of matters is exactly the same in terms of work process, in terms of the kinds of tasks we perform, in terms of the kind of data that we need. And so the idea that the knowledge practice was something that people were keeping to themselves and not sharing more collaboratively and learning from with each iteration and reapplying was seen as one of the major issues in front of them. And then finally, and probably most importantly to my mind, is continuous improvement. The idea that lawyers have been pretty bad generally about taking the time or having the critical frankly, the honesty to engage in conversations at the conclusion of the matter as well as during matters about what we probably did really well and what we probably should have done differently or better. And then actually applying that to the next matter as opposed to just running off to begin the next piece without having learned anything from it or caring whether the client as the corporation to the in-house lawyer or the client as the in-house department to the law firm had actually taken the time to say, how are we doing? Are we actually driving the results that you would like us to drive? Do you think that we're providing the service that you think is most important here? And lawyers have never asked these questions. If we're honest with ourselves, we've never asked. Continuous improvement is going to probably be the most critical stage. So let's jump forward to talking just a little bit about what it is that the kinds of things that tech can do to start addressing some of those client wants or needs over here. Certainly for measurable results, we need metrics driven by data. For better management and lean efficiency, we need project and process management, both. For certainty and predictability, we need cost and spend analysis. For costs that equate with value, we need competitive comparatives between the kinds of service providers who are out there, or individually at that level, what kind of worker is best equipped to perform what kinds of services, or in the parlance, horses for courses. The idea of actually, instead of saying, well, Bob's got capacity right now, let's throw him on this project, instead being far more mindful about who it is who does what work and what kinds of tools they need, both in terms of their skill set and the technology to support them to get it done. Knowledge practices that harness experiences, and then these ideas of things like after actions and scorecards and full discussions of productivity and competence to practice. Lawyer competence is probably going to be one of the most interesting issues to my mind going forward in the next several years, because we're so focused on who we hire out of a law school and how we're going to get them those first couple of years of training. Incredibly important. I completely agree. But what happens after that? After lawyers have been in practice for 3, 4, 5 years, we get really overconfident about what it is we do and how good we are at doing it. And not only is that a question of that continuous improvement evaluation process, it has to do with our practices becoming stale. We become one-trick ponies. As expert as we may be Marty Lipton, but you wouldn't hire him for your divorce, okay? There are lots of people who do things really well, but that doesn't mean that they are competent to do what's next. And what it is that lawyers have been famous for doing as a result is trying to keep on selling to their clients what it is that they do really well, which is a specific kind of legal problem solving. And what we're going to talk about is we have to get out of the mode of solving legal problems and into the mode of solving business problems, because that's where the relevancy for lawyers in this new market economy is going to be, is not in trying to substitute their big brains for Watson and coming up with those decisions that were important for understanding desegregation questions. And it's not for trying to replace the document discovery, document sifting jobs that e-discovery providers can bring to us with technologies as well as highly trained workers. It's to talk with our clients about what it is that we bring because of our knowledge of their industry, our incredible intellectual and emotional understanding of their business needs directly, and what it is that we as lawyers bring by way of judgment to what's legal but stupid and therefore shouldn't be done, to what it is that is possible for the company to do to take advantage of a new and opening marketplace because we can see that opportunity and we're not down trying to figure out how to do the e-discovery delivery. So let's start first by talking a little bit about law firms because it's such a big part of the portfolio. This may be hard for you to read in back. You'll have these slides later, so if you'd like to copy them, you're fine, but you don't need to. This is from the Altman-Weil 2015 Law Firms in Transition Survey. And for those of you in-house who follow what it is that law firms are doing, this is one of my favorite surveys. It comes out every year, so the year-over-year numbers are great. The trend lining is very good, and I really highly recommend it for that. But they also ask some really nice questions. So the question here is your firm doing any of the following to increase efficiency of legal service delivery? And the top getting answer up here is using technology tools to replace human resources. Wow. 58% of them. And these are firms from across the spectrum. I mean, it includes most of the representatives of the AmLaw 100, of the larger firms representing the FTSE companies. There are a variety of large level firms in this, but there's also a lot of firms from the mid-tier. This is not reflective of the smallest firms in the marketplace. So this tends to be the firms that are most likely to be in your profiles right now for larger segments of your work. Knowledge management was the second highest score at almost 57%. Rewarding efficiency and profitability in compensation decisions. The third rail of law firms, they're actually starting to try to connect compensation to the result they want to drive. Oh my God, cats and dogs living together, right? It's a really exciting world when we start remembering that people do what they're paid to do. And so if law firms have traditionally paid people for a big stack of hours, guess what they're going to produce? A big stack of hours, as opposed to rewarding efficiency and frankly profitability. Not just did I get my bill out and even did I get my bill paid, but the actual profitability of the work that's being done, which is huge. Because if the cost of producing the work is exactly the same as the revenue that's brought in to pay for the work, that's not profitable work. It may keep you all in business, but it's not profitable work in terms of margins. So, going down the list, project management training, shifting work to contract or temporary lawyers, shifting work from lawyers to paraprofessionals, re-engineering work processes down here. We'll talk about this. There's a problem right there. And that's the hard one. That's the big behavioral problem, is trying to get lawyers who've been at their desks doing their job, providing their services the same way for however many years, in my case, 25 years. Whenever you've got a lot of people who've done it the same way, and quite frankly, let's admit it, it's really hard to convince a bunch of millionaires they're doing something wrong. Most people in big firms have done very nicely, thank you, for decades doing work this way. And here are you Watson people coming in to tell them how they're going to do their work. Or here I am as some, management consultant. So, I think you should do it this way, and they all kind of sit in the back row and go, and then you wonder if you're going to get paid your fee for coming in to do the keynote. And, so it's the hardest one that you're going to run across is getting people to start reprocessing the way they do work and even rethinking what work they should be doing using non-law firm vendors. TISCs, that's under 17%. But the big secret is that some of the biggest firms in the world now are developing their own internal captive service centers. I think there are some represented in the room. A lot of them don't like to talk about it because they think it somehow diminishes their brand. To say that they have actually spent the time to work on training people, to perform processes that drive efficient results that are measurable. Oh my God, who'd want that, right? But the idea that they're somehow not the high reputation firm, but they're actually able to provide at, in the case of some of the firms in the US who are doing this at $50 or $60 an hour, services that a couple years ago they were charging $450 for an associate to do. That's a huge issue. None of the above. That's the 7% who will be out of business by next year's survey, right? So moving on to the next. Now this one's my favorite because who knew that y'all were going to be here from Watson, right? They actually ask a question, can you envision a law-focused Watson replacing any of the following timekeepers in your firm in the next 5 to 10 years? Select all that apply, all right? Now the gray line is the 2011 response when y'all first came out, right? And the 2015 is in blue. So take a look. I mean, you clearly see that across the board, the perception is, except at the very bottom for, the Luddite answer down here at the bottom, which is computers will never replace people who do work in our firm. All the rest of these folks are starting to understand that there will be a replacement, but they're most willing to replace the people who are at the bottom of the food chain in the firm. Are you surprised? I'm not. I'm not saying that's a horrible thing. That's human nature. To believe that I must be infallible, but, Sally over here, she could probably go, right? There's an old saying in Washington D.C. where I'm from I think it was Senator Long who used to sing it on the floor of the Senate. Don't tax you, don't tax me, tax that guy behind the tree. That's what it is we're doing over here. Is we're trying to find out who's most expendable. And part of the problem in the law firm community is, as we all know, you make money a couple of ways in law firms. Right? You make money by increasing the number of hours that lawyers work or by increasing the amount you charge. Now notice I didn't say increasing your rates because there are an increasing number of firms who are charging in a variety of other ways than hourly rates. But you have to do one of the two. The third one that firms discovered post-2008 was cutting expenses. That if they cut back a lot of expense, they fired all the secretarial staff and they changed the copy paper to something that you could see through, and they, took some of the square footage down in some of the associates' offices, and they talked about an open floor plan, but they aren't going to implement one. But they started looking at, but there's only so long you can do that. And increasingly virtual firms, it's all great, but that doesn't go on forever, correct? I mean, you've got to get to a point where at some point you're able to start recognizing a little bit more cost saving from other places. Right now, they're still in the time zone of thinking about how it is they're going to let go of less highly compensated people when actually the conversation might need to turn over. Is your firm currently pursuing any of the following alternative staffing strategies? Part-time lawyers, contract lawyers, staff lawyers, outsourcing non-lawyer functions, creating low-cost service centers, outsourcing the legal work, and none of the above. Again, now it's up to 18% of people who will be out of business before this next survey comes down. But, again, starting to look at that horses for courses issue. And I'll jump forward. So if that's what it is that firms are looking at, what does this tell us about what departments are doing or should be doing? Because while it's real easy for us in departments to sit there on our throne and literally dictate, thou shalt in the boroughs all go off and find ways to be more efficient and more process managed and more project managed and better staffed and better trained. We in the department have often conveniently forgot the need for us to be the leaders on this challenge. And while it is the responsibility of law firms, since they are in the business of making millions a year providing these services, they should be ahead of the curve. They should be not needing to be instructed, if you will, on what it is they should do. But it's really hard for us to not only choose the right ones, but collaborate with the right ones and reward the right ones if we ourselves in departments aren't developing the same kinds of skills and the same kinds of adaptability and, frankly, the same kinds of efficiencies that we're demanding of our firms or our legal process outsourcers. So this idea of who's leading and who's following has been a challenge in the market. And I think Rohit was right when he said part of the problem is that most in-house lawyers come from the law firms that they're trying to manage and supervise on these issues. We're all equally incapable. But similarly, there is a window that's open right now that all of us have a little bit of time and effort, with a little bit of time and effort, can experiment within that window. Pretty soon the window starts to shut. Pretty soon those in departments, as well as those in firms who aren't able to leverage this stuff and who don't see ways that they are going to put themselves into a new kind of practice environment, leveraging technology, looking at data, making better informed decisions, will all be out. There's an old line that I learned early on in my time at ACC in the States, that there were two mantras, actually, not just one. There were two mantras of in-house practice. And the first one was, no one ever got fired for hiring Skadden. I should have said DLA, shouldn't I? Yes, okay. No one ever got fired for, well, at that point it wasn't. But, and the concept behind that was if you had the big reputation name firm, even if things went south, you could always say, well, we had Skadden. I mean, we had the best advice, and you didn't want your client saying, but they had, someone else. That they had DLA. That's what it was. How come they had DLA? They won because of that, and we had this firm that I don't know and never heard of. But the second mantra was, I think, even more important, which was I hire the lawyer and not the firm. I know I've heard most of you say it at one point in time, even if I wasn't there, I hire the lawyer and not the firm. The relationship with the individual lawyers you hire in firms is incredibly important. But if you're hiring a lawyer who works in a firm that isn't supporting these kinds of practices, you are asking him or her to swim upstream like a salmon, to lay his or her eggs and die. Okay? They simply will not survive in their firm or do you well if you do not find a way to find a firm that supports lawyers doing what it is you want them to do. So you can talk all you want about how you love your lawyer X at law firm Y, but if you aren't looking at law firm Y with as close a scrutiny as you are lawyer X and how they do their work, you're crazy, because they will not be supported in doing this. And that's one of the most important things you can do in driving this kind of change, is not trying to make the firms technologically more savvy, but choosing and rewarding firms and legal service providers who actually do this work the way you want them to do it. Right? Okay, so we're going to talk a little bit about these things, and I'm running out of time, so I want to make sure I get to it. The last thing I want to say before the slides go, when we talk about what it is you should be doing in your department, in-house departments used to be created to be the best law firm that a company could provide for itself. It was like a little captive insurance company kind of a thing or whatever, that you would have these in-house teams who were essentially modeled to look like an in-house law firm. And that's not what we should be doing as far as I'm concerned. I realize this is my opinion and not necessarily others, but the whole point of in-house lawyers is not to replicate services that those outside the company could provide in one way or another. In-house lawyers should be doing some different things. They should be working on things that have to do with the business problems. And while they want to drive their lawyers in law firms and in the service providers they use to be more focused on those business issues, if you yourselves are not engaged in the practice of business as opposed to the practice of law within your company, you will find your value within the organization decreasing over time. And you will be more expendable, not only to people who can be outsourced with the kinds of services that you'll provide or come elsewhere, or replaced by folks who do have that background. So solving those business problems requires a different toolkit than most lawyers have or use. It's not what we were trained to do. I mean, I don't know about you. I went to law school largely because I was told there wouldn't be any numbers, right? So when I got done with my political philosophy degree, and I'd been reading, the comparatives between Kant and whatever, I was very well prepared to do about this much, other than maybe, as my parents had, go into teaching, or maybe to go off into some kind of government work, right? But if I went on to law school, I figured, hey, I can go into business with no business sense. I can go into business without having to be responsible for all of that other green eye shade kind of stuff, which is the way that I disrespectfully thought about what everybody else brought to the table in the business environment. And so what I want to say to you is that don't look at the tech and data stuff as if it's trying to take over what you do. What you do as a lawyer is incredibly important and unique. It is there instead as a tool to help you perform that role better in a business-like fashion, because you're being evaluated not as a lawyer within your company. You may be the only lawyer within your business organization, unlike when you worked in a law firm and you were surrounded by people who thought and were educated like you were educated and who had practices like yours. Now that you're working in a company, you've got a completely different mindset. You have to think like the CFO, like the head of personnel and HR, like the people who are thinking about distribution and marketing and sales and all the other kinds of good stuff. So use the tech to do that. Now, practices within departments can target all kinds of things. First off, and I think Rohit, you had made a reference to Casey, yes, in your conversation. Casey Flaherty, who was at Kia at the time, Kia decided under Casey's leadership to put together a legal tech audit, they called it, and they sent out a very simple test. I shouldn't say it was simple, I'd probably have flunked it. They sent out a test of things that should be simple for a lawyer to do within the course of any kind of litigation that they might be performing. And the associates were administered this test, and Casey had based it on how long it took him to perform these functions, how to convert a file from PDF to something else so that you could extract data from it in documents you were asked to put together. Things that associates have to do all the time. And he found that, some super huge percentage, vast majority of the associates who were given this test failed it miserably. That on average, tasks that lawyers should have been able to perform in 15 seconds to 3 minutes were taking them hours to perform because they didn't know basic functions in their Microsoft Office suite or in PDFing or in Excel spreadsheet formats. And we all know this happens, and it happens especially not for associates. I can't wait till we start asking the firms to apply the test to the partnership. I mean, I still know a couple people who refuse to do email and have their secretaries print them out. I mean, they're a dying breed, but they are still there. This whole idea of basic technologies and the skill sets that are necessary to them is one of the first things you can do in your department, is to make sure people actually know how to use the stuff they already got and use it well and evaluate whether others are using it well in their practices. Improve department operational efficiency. There's an increasing number of companies who are now having someone in the role of what you might call chief of staff or legal operations. And this is a group that I've been working with for a long time. Frankly, one of the biggest controversies amongst this group is what they should call themselves. And the internal answer to that question when they've all been polled is chief of stuff. Because these are the people who kind of support the general counsel in doing everything from the pro bono and diversity plans to the personnel evaluations and hiring to questions about which firms and guidelines will be in place for outsourcing, looking at the tech, figuring out compensation issues with the general counsel, creating and sending off the reports to management on law department performance, the whole range of things. Tasks that are not lawyering tasks, but traditionally, somebody in the department had to come up with this stuff because there wasn't someone appointed. And so larger departments are now increasingly developing that kind of operations staff intensity. And what it is that those people are doing is looking very closely at operational efficiency. So if you're in a department that's got one or getting one, it's a real yay boo. Yay, someone's going to be doing this. Boo, someone's going to be doing this. You're going to have to live up to a variety of new standards they're going to bring into play for how the law department does business and assesses how well it's doing. Lean process and knowledge practices that leverage experience and avoid reinventing that wheel. Facilitated communication, collaboration, and information sharing. Huge issue. Huge, 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 huge issue. We're all trained as lawyers as lone wolves. We're going to come up with the answer to this question by ourselves. We're going to research it ourselves. We're going to work on it by ourselves. We may work with another group of people in a team, but for the most part, we will avoid anything we can do to avoid the opportunity to actually have to share with other people what we're doing or to work in a collaborative team. We assume that every time we work on a team, others will be dragging us down. They'll be lowering the collective IQ. They must not do it as well as I do it, right? So it's been a real problem to get lawyers working more collaboratively, figuring out how to develop team-like skill sets. And technologies can really help with this by creating work environments in which data and information are shared, by which practices can be stored and leveraged, by which people can enter information that goes beyond what I build or how long it took me, but actually talks about the method that I used in working on this. So external and virtual team management and coordination, all of the comparatives that now law departments are increasingly doing on their own spend and on the spend of all the different firms in their portfolios, how much it takes them to do it, how long it takes them to turn it over, what kinds of staffing they're using, what kinds of results they're driving, all incredibly important. Applying data to spend, efficiency, productivity, and competence. And I've underlined the last two because to the point of this is what's available now, to the question of what it is that's in process now and will be what's guiding us in the future, advancing the company's business interest or strategic agenda is what it is that in departments we're going to have to be doing. We're not going to be focused on managing the litigation. We're going to be focusing on predictive practice of how we have eliminated all problems in that area. Because we've got our hands around them now. We're not just developing different ways to address how to deal with the remedial aspects of that or how to better manage the law firms we've had to hire to litigate us out of this issue. We're going to be totally focused on preventing the problem from ever arising or thinking about how we're going to strategically help the business get the next 5 deals ahead of the competitor company because we know the path. So all of the data issues are going to be driving the future agendas for the firm, and it will all support the evaluation metrics and KPI that we really need in order to show clients within our companies that we actually deliver measurable results. Not just big piles of activity, but we've been working hard, right? That's not results. Working hard is admirable, racking up hours, wonderful, you got great work ethic. Did you solve the freaking problem? Is what's going to be the issue of how you're going to be evaluated in the future. And this idea of, well, I can't control it. It's not something I can control. Well, why did they hire you then? Who else have they got to go to? You need to figure out how to be the person who solves that problem, not just manages it. So with all of that in mind, here we go. I want to say one word about better, faster, cheaper. There's a reason for the order. Better and faster makes it cheaper. The goal is not to make it cheaper at the start, it's to do it better and faster. That's how it makes it cheaper over time. So stop focusing in everything you're doing on tech on how you can try to engage in a race to the bottom in costs. Because while costs are expensive, the result will naturally be better if you focus on the process. You focus on the project management. You develop the knowledge resources. You staff your matters internally and externally to efficiency and results, and you're able to measure it. Suddenly, it becomes cheaper. You've moved work to the best group to do it, which over time, inevitably, is the cheaper group to do it. But if it's not, most clients aren't interested in cheap. They're interested in value. They want the problem solved. So if you're able to articulate why you needed the more expensive resource, it is a welcomed conversation. When you're not able to articulate it and you say, because we had to have Skadden, a monkey can hire Skadden. It's not that Skadden's not a great firm. It's that it's not necessarily what I would call a valuable legal skill set to be able to say, I hired one of the more reputable and expensive firms in the marketplace without any other credential behind them, except that they were a highly reputable firm in the marketplace. You need a much better data point and a data set than that. So leading practices, we don't have time to go through them all. What I will do is send off to you, and for the packet that's following up, is that okay, Becky? A write-up for all of these different companies who are doing different kinds of things. Some of them internally on their own, without anybody else's assistance, and some of them are things that they are doing in collaboration with either their law firms or with other service providers. A lot of these practices, and there's nothing here that's secret, and I consult with a number of these companies, but I will tell you that all these things have been listed in magazines or in the ACC Value Challenge Champions or in other places where you can find out about them. I think there's even some of these companies represented in the room. You guys are no slouches. It's just that you need to do more to start sharing information. So I'll come to a conclusion by telling you that I think that some of the most interesting things that are coming out are those things that are being done when companies are starting to figure out how to collaborate with other companies on what it is they're doing. Because there really isn't a playbook out there that tells anybody, we're making this stuff up. I mean, I know tech has been out there, but lawyers don't have experience in this. So when companies sit down with other companies and say, anybody tried this? Anybody have a template for that? Anybody working on this? And they start to engage in those conversations and share, and they do the same thing with their firms and their process providers. It goes back to what it is that Rohit told us at the beginning of the day about this entire conversation being more about a movement that is a collaborative movement of people working together to share to solve these problems. Because at the end of the day, I don't think it's going to be a profitable business for any lawyer in a law firm, in a legal process outsourcer, or in a law department to figure that the way they're going to make their money in the corporate market is by acting on their own, with walls around them and not sharing or talking with anyone else. We will all advance, or we will all not advance together in this marketplace. All boats rise or sink. So the ideas behind all of these practices are really going to be based on that evaluation and that collaborative environment and working with those folks who are out there who do this kind of work with us on a daily basis. I'll end by saying, I know this is hard. And it looks like that big, you had a red box instead of a black box. It looks like that big box of stuff that's just too big to take on. Choose a couple of ideas. Choose something that's scaled to your industry, to your practice, to your department size, to what kinds of resources you have. Make darn sure it's a success. Take one or two things and bring them home, right? And you'll find that over time, people will not only buy in and want to work with you on them, but the successes you have will build the next success. It's just important to get started. It's very easy not to get started. It's really hard to change the tires while the bus is moving. Everybody gets that. But it's not going to be the excuse that will any longer allow us to avoid these kinds of questions. So one size fits one. Choose those discrete projects, make them relevant, customize them to ensure they succeed. Incremental change. You can't change everything overnight. You can't go in on a project and say we're going to reform or re-engineer the entire fill in the blank that is the central part of our business and expect that that's going to be well received. You're going to need leadership in order to overcome the behavioral barriers. And leadership will take place not only at the general counsel level, but at every successive level down in the department. You need to focus on compensation, accountability, and evaluation. In your department, you need to reward people for what you want them to do. And if you don't, and you make it clear that people will be rewarded for doing things that are contrary to what you want to do, it's all over. It really has to focus on that. Model from your corporate client you have your best teachers in the company in other departments. Trot on down to finance. Go on over to procurement. They don't have to take over your function, but they have a lot of skill sets and relevant ideas that you may be able to borrow from and adapt that we never learned in law school, or that we never learned in our years of practice in a law firm. Capture and report your results. You need to be trumpeting what it is you're doing, and you can't do it if you can't measure it. If you can't demonstrate what the value was, it's really difficult to go forward. And then look for those uses that accelerate the business as well as legal goals. And if you do all of those things on a couple of projects to get started, if you partner with people who are able to help you make this a success, and there are lots of folks out there, but you've got one of the best in the room, I really think you'll find that there are lots of ways that this environment will become not only an interesting and challenging one, but one that makes your future career far more interesting, because you'll be letting go of the work that, frankly, none of us wants to do, and starting to focus more time and attention on the work that really allows us to fulfill our potential. So if you've got questions, I'm hanging around afterwards. You're welcome to give me a call. I'll also make sure you've got all the practices you can read through, and if you ever want to discuss any of them or how they can work, happy to do that too. Thank you, Carl, for the opportunity.